about the events of Holy Thursday. So we talked about the Last Supper of Jesus. We talked about his praying in the garden. We talked about his betrayal, his arrest, and his initial imprisonment. That's the waning hours of Holy Thursday. At least as we kind of track it, kind of our normative time experience. Friday opens. It begins with a trial. Jesus appears before a group of high priests and elders that are known as the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin. These Sanhedrin is therefore kind of, perhaps the highest religious authority for the Judeans, the Jews. Many of them, though perhaps not all of them, have been antagonized. They feel.
Hey, Professor Straub.
I'm sorry, yes?
What was that? Sanhedrin?
Sanhedrin. I know this screen isn't the best. Let me see.
And what was it? Okay, that's better. And what was it? What did it stand for?
That's the name of the priestly council.
Okay, thank you.
So, the Sanhedrin meets, they present a case concerning this Jesus, about what his crimes are. The main crime that they accuse him of, the main crime that is given to him, is the crime of blasphemy. Why this particular crime? Blasphemy is to speak wrongly or falsely about God, or to abuse the name of God.
He claims he's the Son of God.
Right. That's
blasphemy if you're Jewish, I guess.
And they argue that's impossible. That it is impossible for him to be that. They try to bring forward witnesses. The most witnesses that they can bring alter some of the words of Jesus. That they claim what Jesus says is, destroy the temple, that big, magnificent temple that has been in construction in Jerusalem for a few decades. Destroy that temple, and it will be rebuilt in 3 days. Those aren't the words Jesus actually says. Or at least, that's not the temple he's referring to.
Well, after he lets out his last cry and takes his last breath, the curtain.
No, we're not there yet.
Oh, okay.
We'll get all there. So, accuse him of that. Not necessarily because he's calling himself the Son of God per se, but calling God his Father. Which I said before, is something very foreign to the ancient Israelites, to the Jews. God is Lord, the Almighty, or the Most High. God is not known in a fond or affectionate title as Father. So the charge is brought forward. They interrogate Jesus, and they ask him, the chief priest, a man known as Caiaphas, Caiaphas, the high priest. So among the priests, he is the chief priest. So he is supposed to offer the most important sacrifice. He's supposed to offer the principal Passover sacrifice the next morning, actually later that day. Caiaphas directly asks Jesus, are you the Son of God? And the answer that Jesus gives is a kind of sometimes called an Aramaicism. Because what he literally says is, you say so. Which sounds to us rather kind of, oh, well, it's just whatever you say. But it seems more than says, look, you have said it. That's what it is. You said it. I think sometimes we even still use that kind of verb. Like, oh, you said it. So in this affirmative way, he says, yes, or you say so. This enrages Caiaphas. In fact, he rips his garments, normally a sign of being in the presence of sin, or cry out to God. Now, in the Mosaic law, and the law that was given by Moses, blasphemy is one of the most serious breaches of the law. And blasphemy, being one of the most serious, receives the most serious penalty, death. The law prescribes death by stoning. However, the Jews are not on their own. They are not their own country, their own people, their own government. They do not have the authority to execute someone. That is reserved for the Roman governor, the one who reigns in the place of the emperor in that region.
Pilate.
Exactly. The man known as Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilatus would be his original Latin name. It sometimes becomes Pilate, Pilate.
Now I was gonna say, it was in. Why is it that the three different versions from Matthew, Luke, and Mark, but in I believe it was Matthew, Pontius, he like washed his hands, basically.
We'll look at it.
Yeah.
So the trial of Jesus with the bringing of witnesses, was it all just for show? Did they like sort of decide already since they were in course with Judas?
I mean, yeah, the majority seems to already want him dead. They're just trying to, or enough of them do that but they want to maybe convince the others. Because when Caiaphas asks that question, Jesus says yes, or gives him the affirmative answer. He says, what need have we of witnesses? You've heard the charge. He's done it in our very presence. And that seems to be enough to sway at least the majority needed to pass a sentence of judgment like that. But as I said, they cannot execute. That is a particular juridical action reserved to the Roman governor, who at this time is a man called Pontius Pilate. So, as the sun is rising, they bring Jesus before Pilate. Now, the sections we are looking at are Matthew chapter 27, Mark chapter 15, Luke chapter 23. In each of those Gospels, the second to last chapter before the end. So in all of them, as morning rises, as morning emerges, they take him to Pilate. Now, Pilate is a Roman. Pilate is not a Jew in the ethnic sense, a member of one of the Judean peoples. This is not his religion. These are not his people. His duty is to maintain stability and control, to ensure that the tax money flows to the empire, otherwise to keep the peace. So he doesn't care about their religious squabbles. He doesn't care about them arguing about their god or gods, or what is to be believed. All he cares about is maintaining peace. So the chief priests, the Sanhedrin, know they cannot present this charge as being worthy of execution, because everything he has said has not blasphemed against the most important semi-divine figure, the emperor or the empire. Pilate doesn't care if this Jesus blasphemes their God. That's their God. That's their issue. So they have to convince him. They have to convince Pilate that he is worthy of dying, that he has committed a crime worthy of being executed for, of exercising capital punishment. The way that they do it is to have him be accused of committing treason. They accuse Jesus of committing treason against the empire and the emperor. Because what they do is argue that he is establishing himself as a king in opposition to the empire and the emperor. You notice here, Pilate asks in some of these, "Are you the king of the Jews?" That's the accusation they bring against him. This Jesus claims he is the king of the Jews. And if one is a king, that means one is not subject or beneath the emperor. So in effect, labeling him as a revolutionary. And in fact, treason is seen as so awful because it is seen as stealing from the state, stealing what is owed to the state. This is why sometimes, this is why in the text he's said to have been crucified among the thieves. Petty thieves don't get crucified in Rome, in Roman times. He's crucified with other revolutionaries or other ones accused of treason, committing the ultimate theft, not of gold or bread, but of the loyalty and respect due to the empire and the emperor. And in all three accounts here in the Synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when asked by Pilate, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus says in all three of them that Aramaism, You say so. You said it. Not a denial. Not even a flippant, oh, whatever. You say so, as you say it, as you have declared. Mark and Matthew say that the chief priests and the elders bring up other accusations to try to corroborate their accusation of treason, and that Jesus does not answer any of them. Pilate seems to notice that. Do you not hear what they're saying? He says in Matthew. Mark, he asks, have you no answer? No reply? Both of them, Pilate is very amazed. Luke seems to kind of jump forward. Luke says, and Pilate says, I don't find him guilty. He's done nothing. Even as the chief priests and the elders are being insistent, Luke kind of has a side trip here that Matthew and Mark do not relate. Because they have brought up that Jesus is a Galilean. He is from the region of Galilee. That means that he is actually under the responsibility of not directly Pontius Pilate, but one of the client kings, Herod Agrippa. Herod is in Jerusalem at this time. So Pilate, in Luke's account, sends Jesus to Herod. Herod seems, as the text says, Herod seems very positive in seeing Jesus. He's heard about this miracle worker, this great teacher, all he's done, all his miracles. And he's hoping to see him before betrayal. Right here, the end of verse 8. Oh, look, it's a magician. Do a trick for us. Herod questions Jesus at some length, Luke says, but then Jesus gave no answer. Chief priests and scribes continue their accusations and charges of blasphemy and whatnot. They probably tried this with Herod more, so Herod would understand, being a Jew. And everyone seems to be mocking him. Luke says that Herod has Jesus clothed in resplendent garb. People's walking in, well, if you're a king, you can dress up and look nice. Herod finishes with Jesus not really doing anything, not seeming to answer, not satisfying Herod. So Herod sends Jesus back to Pilate. Luke writes in verse 12 there, he says, Herod and Pilate became friends that very day, even though they had been enemies formerly. Returning to Pilate and Luke's account, Pilate says, I don't find him guilty. He says, hey, I'll punish him a little. But he says, kind of down here, it's hard to see him on this version. Verse 15, he says, no capital crime has been committed. Nothing worthy of death has been committed here. He says, I'll just have him flogged, and then I'll release him, and I'm done with him. However, the chief priests and the Sanhedrin, the council of the elders, all they raise a ruckus. They want Jesus dead. Now remember, this is the Feast of Passover, and it's happening on this day. Thousands of people are in Jerusalem right now, at this very moment. So Pilate decides to try to be a little political. He's heard of this Jesus. I mean, who hasn't heard of this Jesus? His fame stretches throughout the whole land. So Pilate hopes to trick the chief priests and the elders by turning to the crowd. They all relate, Luke less so than Matthew and Mark, that on this occasion of the observance of Passover, the Roman governor seemed to have a custom that he would, as a sign of maybe appeasement, as a way of kind of calming the crowd, he would release a prisoner. He would release one prisoner, whomever the crowd requested. And of course, usually he probably wanted whoever was the most popular. But it's a sign of, you could say, a sign of respect, or just at least a minimum, a sign of appeasement. It's like, hey, I released somebody else. Calm down, do what you need to do, and then go home. So Pilate, kind of trying to be a smooth political operator, brings out one of the prisoners, a man who was called Barabbas. He was a notorious prisoner. He was known to be a rebel himself. So accused of the same crime as Jesus in the Roman system, accused of treason as well.
I thought his charge was it said something like murder or stealing in one of them.
Committed murder and rebellion.
Yeah.
As Mark says. So not only had he rebelled, he had murdered as well. He had killed. So adding indemnity upon indemnity.
So
So
why
Pilate takes it out to kind of the main plaza, the main square of his little gubernatorial fortress. There's a crowd gathered around. They're all like, what's going on with this Jesus? What's happening? What's the governor doing? And so Pilate opens it up to the crowd. The crowd starts asking him to do what he usually does, release someone. So Pilate asks, who do you want me to release? Do you want me to release Barabbas or Jesus called the Messiah in Matthew? Or in Mark, he says, to release to you the King of the Jews. Why? Because Pilate knew, 18 and 10 here, the last verses in these passages. Pilate knew it was an envy. Envy was what drove the hearts of these chief priests and these elders. Why? Jesus attracted crowds. Jesus attracted fame. The people loved him. And many were probably beginning to despise those priests, because they always are antagonizing Jesus. It's out of envy that they act. So Pilate appeals to the crowd to bring about a resolution. Matthew adds an interesting note here. It's only in Matthew's gospel. Neither Mark nor Luke says any of this. Matthew says that Pilate receives a message of some sort from his own wife. Who tells tells him to have nothing to do with that Jesus. Have nothing to do with him. I suffered much in a dream today because of him. She doesn't relate what the dream is. She doesn't relate, I suffered much in a dream. So whether it's a full dream or a vision, unclear from the text itself. But she advocates to her husband, only in Matthew's gospel, mind you. Advocates to her husband, dismiss it, be gone with him. Matthew just kind of throws that in the midst of all of this text. So Pilate tries a ploy to appease the crowd, who should be in the favor of Jesus. Jesus is a very popular figure. He should be acclaimed greatly by Pilate. But all three relate that the crowds begin to ask for Barabbas. Matthew and Mark say that the chief priests and the elders stir up or persuade the crowds to do so. How? Unclear, unknown. So as they're crying out, release Barabbas, release Barabbas. Pilate, being unsure, well, what do you want me to do with this Jesus, with this one you call the king of your king, the king of the Jews? The crowd shouts back, crucify him. Matthew is a more passive, let him be crucified. Pilate seems to be kind of aghast at this. His ploy seems to be failing. Shouldn't the crowd love Jesus? Isn't the crowd on Jesus' side? So Pilate even asks, what evil has he done? What has he done? In all three, Pilate asks that question. And yet the crowd only shouts the louder. In each of the cases, the tension rises. In Luke, he kind of says, well, I'll flog him and then I'll release him. If you think he's done a harsh crime, I'm just going to flog him. But even there, they persevere in calling for the crucifixion of Jesus. Pilate, maintaining his political shrewdness, sees that the crowd is not doing what he wants, but goes along with the crowd. And literally gives us the phrase for doing that. Matthew's gospel here, verses 24 and following. When Pilate saw he was not succeeding at all, but that a riot was breaking out. So now he's doing what he can to quell the riot. All right, fine. This is what you want, fine. I'll do it. But Pilate takes water, washes his hands in the sight of the crowd, and he says, I am innocent of this man's blood. Look to it yourselves.
Was that Pilate? That's what I was asking. Was that Pilate basically saying, like, his blood is not on my hands, it's on yours?
Yeah, that's literally what it means. Yes.
Even though
that's where we get that phrase.
So basically, even though he convicted him in a sense by giving him to the crowd because he knew what they were going to do, he basically just washed his
He knew
hands.
he was innocent.
Yeah.
He knew Jesus was innocent of the main crime for which they wanted him to be crucified. But since the crowd wants Jesus crucified, he says the responsibility is on you.
Okay. Now, I was going to say, because wouldn't it make it, in a sense, like even though he's the one that has to do the punishing or the punishment, he just said, I won't do it. So since you all want him to be crucified and die, here, take him.
And say, I'm not going to stop it. So fine, let him die. Want him crucified? Let him be crucified. And Matthew has the people respond, his blood be upon us and upon our children, which seems to be a typical semi-juridical phrase that the crowd would issue. So it is then that Pilate condemns or permits Jesus to suffer the full punishment of the crucifixion. Mark kind of highlights how all that will go. First, he has Jesus scourged. S-C-O-U-R-G-E-D. Scourged. So how does that work? Luke does not necessarily describe it. He just used the word scourge. Matthew and Mark relate similar accounts. That the Roman soldiers, who are basically the policemen of the empire, they take Jesus inside the praetorium, the gubernatorial palace. They clothe him in purple, first of all. This seems to be a detail particular to Jesus, not often done. Why? Purple is a royal color. Purple is a very expensive dye in these times because it is hard to make versus things like maybe blue or red. Purple is a very expensive dye or process. So basically only royalty or the richest can afford to do it. So it becomes a great sign of royalty. Matthew calls it a scarlet military cloak. They then place on his head a crown that some of them had made out of thorns. Why? Because a king needs a crown. And if he's the king of the Jews, well, he needs a crown. So we'll make a crown. Roman soldiers can be very brutal, even towards their friends, exposed friends. And they all mocked him. Hail, King of the Jews, Ave Rex Judeorum, they would say in their Latin. Oh, he's the king. We greet thee, we salute thee, O glorious king. So this punishment is not just a physical reality in the sense of just something that Jesus endures in his body. It is something subjected upon him in almost every sort of perspective. This is, as it were, a kind of psychological warfare to break down one's spirit. Oh, this is what you are doing. You need to greet thee. Hail, greet thee. Knelt before him in mock homage, as if he was a king.
What is the significance of the reed in this right?
Well, because that would be kind of a symbol of power that kings would have. If you ever see images of kings, they have a scepter, I think is what it's normally called. That's just a sign of the extent of their authority that's kind of extended from them. So a reed is a kind of a hard plant. So they're just getting something to put in his hand to make it look like a king. He's a king. He not only needs purple, he not only needs a crown, he needs a scepter as well. And immediately after this mock homage, they began to abuse him. They strip him of it. They spat on him. They strike him with the reed. They then strip him and prepare him to be crucified. Yes?
I don't know if this is the same part, but I always watch like the Passion movie,
Okay.
really intense one. And
Okay.
what's that thing where they like throw it and like falls to a scale like
Where?
is that farther? Okay.
That's the next, that should be the next part. Yes, the act of scourging. Not something exclusive to Jesus. I want to make clear. This is not something exclusively done to Jesus. Sometimes we hear these things and it's like, well, maybe this is just something. No, this is a punishment often done. When Pilate talks about flogging, this is what he's talking about. So what would happen? What happened in the case of Jesus? Well, stripped, tied to a pillar, so they can't move. Then they have this flagrum, as it's called in Latin, or a whip. So it's made of leather, but at the end, they have sharp things, either metal balls or small bone pieces, as our image shows. And our Roman soldiers, our Roman legionnaires, are professionals. They know how to inflict pain. And so yes, swiping, and usually kind of alternating, usually one on either side, alternating, striking across the back to effect the most pain, the most damage. We hear about lashings in the Roman world, or scourgings. This is what's done. This is what Pilate said, I'll flog him and then I'll release him. I'll just do this. Because that alone won't kill somebody. It'll weaken them. Hopefully it is punishment enough that they won't do whatever they did to deserve it. But having endured that, having gone through all of that, they then force Jesus to carry his cross. Now, one must understand that the cross is huge. Most likely, the vertical part of the cross would have already been planted in the ground. And then what Jesus would have carried is not perhaps necessarily the entire crucifix, entire crux, as it's called in Latin, or cross, but would have carried, as it were, the cross beam. Still, a piece of solid wood that when paired together with the main pillar would be enough to hold a grown man on it. Now, as we just saw, Jesus is not in his healthiest condition. He is whipped, he's been scourged. The wounds are fresh in his back, and he is carrying this on his back. Probably most of us would struggle carrying something like that if we were at our healthiest, let alone in a condition like this. It is related in all three accounts that the Roman legionaries, the Roman soldiers, forced someone to help Jesus carry the cross, whether with him or in his place. Why? They don't want him to die on the road. They don't want him to die walking there. They want him to die on the cross. So he needs some strength to be able to endure that. So they all mention this Simon. Matthew just mentions him, mistake. They all origin is a Cyrenian from the land of Cyrene or Cyrenia. Simon of Cyrene, sometimes how he's referred. Interestingly, Mark mentions this kind of note. Simon of Cyrene was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus. So the community to whom Mark is writing or giving this gospel seems to have this Alexander and Rufus among them. And go, hey, you don't have to just take my word for it. They'd have heard it from their father. So this Simon is forced. This isn't a, would you do this or would you do that? No. He's standing amid the crowds. There are crowds following Jesus as he walks. And of course, the other thieves or revolutionaries as well. They just grab Simon out of the crowd. You, come out here. Pick that up and take it for him. Of course, you don't disobey a Roman soldier without paying the price. So Simon does. Luke has an kind of extended coverage in between here that Matthew and Mark do not. Luke talks about this large crowd, and he mentions these women who are mourning and lamenting. Now, there are many cultures in which mourning and lamenting is a very public matter, not just in the sense of the family mourning and lamenting, but in the sense of the community lamenting and mourning. This happens even today in some cultures, but very much so in ancient cultures. These sort of, you could say, kind of professional lamenters and mourners. This is kind of part of what they do. Jesus turns to them in Luke's gospel and says, he addresses them in this kind of almost royal title, daughters of Jerusalem. Weep not for me, weep instead for yourselves and your children. And he gives a sort of prophecy. Days are going to say, blessed are the barren, the wombs that never bore, the breasts that never nursed. Asking for the mountains to fall on us, the hills cover us. At the end he says, if these things happen when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? And so it is that they proceed to the outskirts of town. Jerusalem, at this point, is kind of a fortress town. It's surrounded by a wall to guard it, as would any important place, to protect it from sieges or military attack. This crucifixion happens outside of the town. As part of the punishment for crucifixion, each criminal receives a titulus, a title card, that outlines what is their crime. Why are they being crucified? Why? Not only to make known who it is who is being crucified, not only the reason why they're crucified, but as a warning. Crucifixion was one of the methods of helping to keep the population controlled. Nobody ever heard of the famous slave rebellions of Spartacus? I may have ever seen the movie Spartacus. There's a famous slave revolt a few decades before Jesus. many non-Roman slaves who gathered together and revolted against the empire and were successful for a time, led by a man known as Spartacus. But when they were finally defeated and captured, they were all crucified along the major roads coming out of Rome. Why? As a warning to the rest of the slaves. This is what will happen if you rebel against us again. So Jesus has a card, a titulus, that says on it, what is his crime? And it's interesting that the texts all say it is issued in 3 languages. It's issued in Latin, it is issued in Greek, and it is issued in Hebrew. Why these 3 languages? Latin first, because it's the language of the empire.
Those were the 3 most common languages around that time.
They're not all 3 that common. Hebrew's not a common language, not in the empire. So Latin is the official language of the rulers, the true rulers, the Romans, the Latins. Greek is the language of the culture. Again, remember, if you want to exchange, this is before Latin takes over. So Greek is still the primary means of communication between different peoples. If you want to do business, you need to at least know Greek. It's beginning to transition. Eventually, Latin will be the majority language, but still this time it's Greek. And Hebrew, because that's the language of the local people, the Jews, the Judeans. There is claimed in one of the churches in Rome to be the very titulus concerning Jesus. Not the entire thing, but a piece of it. And this picture does not do it justice, but you can just see some scratchings in that picture. This is a kind of inscription that's copying that. This is Latin, this is Greek, and this is the remnants of the Hebrew. However, what you will notice most, if you pay attention to the Latin, it's backwards. It not only reads right to left, the very letters are even backwards. R, for example, the E, the N, the S. This is because the Hebrew language reads right to left. Most Western languages, most European languages, read left to right. Look at your paper, how are you writing it down? You're writing it left to right. Which is great if you're a right-hander. So great if you're left-hander. Biased. You're failing the class. No, just kidding. So Latin and Greek read as we would normally read it. Hebrew does not. But who is this directed towards? Is it necessarily directed towards the any traveling Roman or any traveling Greek speaker? No. It is directed towards the people of the land, people whose primary language is Hebrew. So it is written as they would be able to read it. Now, this is only a portion of the title. This is not the titulus, I should say. This piece right here is not the full piece. I don't know if the rest of it is available. I don't actually know that off the top of my head. But the titulus says on it who is being crucified and their crime. For Jesus, it reads, Jesus, the Nazarene, or of Nazareth, King of the Jews. So in Hebrew, in Greek, and in Latin, it reads that. In particular, in Latin, which does not have J's, letter J, so only has I. If I can spell it correctly. Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judeor, which means that same thing. Jesus, the Nazarene, or from Nazareth, King Rex, the Jews. I-N-R-I. Yes.
Why is the E not correct that on my plan?
Well, it's the same as the other ones we backwards.
But isn't that Rex beginning or the end?
Yes. I don't know. It may not have come through very well. It doesn't necessarily mean 100% accurate to what is on. This is just, that's how someone saw it going through it.
Professor Straub,
Yes?
did you say you said Latin was the language of the empire, Hebrew
Yes.
was the language of the Jews, and what was Greek, the most common language?
The language of like the culture.
Language of the culture. Thank you.
So nowadays, if you go anywhere in the world, most people may know a little bit of English. Even though we're not the empire. Yeah, maybe. Probably not. We're too weak to do it. English is very much the language of the culture. So if you go anywhere in the world, not even just as an American, but you go anywhere in the world and you're struggling to speak language to language, you might be able to speak to each other with English. It's the same here with Greek. So this is what those letters mean. If you ever look at maybe a small Catholic crucifixes or crucifixes in general, and they say I-N-R-I. Why is that on there? It symbolizes the titulus, the charge for which he's crucified. He's crucified because he claimed to be the King of the Jews. And actually, chief priests will ask Pilate to say, no, he said he was that. To put maybe claimed or accused. And Pilate will say, what I've written, I've written. Kind of a one last kind of mock of Pilate to the chief priests. So, with the title, with the titulus brought out, it is affixed to the top, to the pillar, and then Jesus begins to be crucified. So what happens is that he is stripped naked and he is nailed to the cross. I must have taken it out. When I say nailed, I mean nailed. And this is, again, not something unique to Jesus, that, oh, Jesus got it wrong. No, this was a regular practice. In fact, they say, doctors have done studies, not just on crucifixion in general, or not of Jesus, but crucifixion in general. They say, normally the images of a crucifix, that it has the nail going through kind of the palm. Most doctors actually say the palms of the hands would not have been able to handle the weight of the body put on it. That it actually would break the hand apart and they would fall off the crucifix. So they say actually that it would be more of the wrist, because the wrist is a big assembly of bones, that it would have a strong enough structure to hold the body. So no, he is not tied up or just gently placed on there. He is roughly put on there and he is nailed on there. And it's agony, it's torture, but it's not enough to kill one yet. He is erected, as the text is sometimes usually translated, between two thieves. Again, two charged with the similar crime of Jesus, a crime of treason, revolution, disobedience, disrespect to the empire. So Jesus being nailed to the cross with the others is elevated. Sorry, sir.
Wait, so, but Jesus wasn't on his wrist, was it? 'Cause it wasn't on his hand, that's why even that one
I-
saint has it on.
That's what kind of doctors say. It's unclear because we don't, beyond the crucifixion of Jesus, which is so often depicted and talked about, there's not many depictions or descriptions in ancient literature about what they do to secure one to the crucifixion, or like how deep the process. They say the hand, but the hand is normally seen as kind of not just from the wrist up, but sometimes including the wrist. So it's unclear. Most doctors that have studied it kind of today would say most likely the wrist would have been where. It's not defeating where it's at, so don't worry too much. The important detail is that he is nailed to this. Cross is erected. That's when the agony begins. Because one struggles to breathe, and one begins to endure immense pain, because you're forced to hold yourself in a position like that. You try holding it for some time just on your own, and you begin to feel it, because especially your upper chest, your shoulder muscles and all that begin to be stretched beyond what they're supposed to be. We don't normally hold ourselves like this. In. So it begins to become very agonizing, very painful. Matthew, Mark, and Luke then relate that darkness falls shortly after Jesus is raised up to the cross. The original text itself says it happens about the 6th hour of the day. Now remember, they didn't have clocks like you and I do, clocks that are easily able to be changed 1 hour forwards or backwards. They went based off the hour of the day. They knew how long an hour was. And so they counted. So when they say the 6th hour of the day, the 6th hour since sunrise. This is normally said to be the hour of noon.
Wouldn't they use sundials still?
Yes, but even with that, they wouldn't have it marked 6 a.m., 7 a.m. It would be marked like 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
So how long was Jesus on the cross then?
3 hours. So the darkness starts at the 6th hour. It lasts until the 9th hour, which is the hour when Jesus expires. So there is a darkness that falls for 3 hours, which is the entire time Jesus is said to be on the cross. Some scientists have said there is traceable to the time of Jesus 2 times when a solar eclipse naturally happened. They can plot where the sun and the moon and everything were at that hour. So one of them is said to be in the year 30, the the other in the year 33. Then a natural eclipse fell on the Passover. I don't know if necessarily for 3 hours, but at least for some period of time. So it's possible that this was merely a natural thing. Roman soldiers had a kind of practice of collecting mementos from their executioners. Executionees, I should phrase it that way. Executionees, who they were executing. Jesus was a man of few possessions. Seems natural. He basically had only the clothes on his back. So they split up those few possessions. Some clothes that they cut up, they split among the 4 of them. It's usually said to be at least 4. But then there is a seamless robe. When I mean seamless, I mean it is a robe that has been woven in one piece. So most of our clothes have seams in them. Like I have seams right here on my shoulders. You would have some probably on your shoulders where your hoodie is, or where maybe where your pockets are, things like that. This garment, this robe, is seamless. So it's not put together on multiple pieces. It is one piece stitched together. If you cut that, it will fall apart. It will not be useful. So they roll the dice for it. Kind of traditional language, they cast lots for it. There is even a point where Jesus is mocked by the high priest. They will come up and go, "Oh, if you're truly the Son of God, come on down. We'll believe you now. You say that you're the Son of God, ask him to help you. Go on, do it." Jesus endures agony for these 3 hours. He lets out a cry. He gives, as his cry, first words of Psalm 22, in kind of the original Hebrew or Aramaic. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you abandoned me? Some misinterpreted it, think he is calling upon one of the prophets. But finally, in his last moments, he makes his cry, "Into your hands, Father, I commend my spirit." Upon reaching that 9th hour, dies, gives up the ghost. This is probably the older King James version translation. Now the Jews always ask that the criminals are taken down in preparation for Saturday, the Sabbath. They don't want them to suffer or work on the Sabbath. So, 3rd hour, the 9th hour, about 3 p.m., sun's starting to set. Remember, the Jewish day starts at sundown, sunset. So the soldiers begin to make sure everyone is dead. They come and they see Jesus is dead. And then they take the bodies off. They climb up, they pull the nails out, they lower the body down. It is related in all of them that there are a group of women down there, usually 1 or 2 men, but mostly women, who are at the foot of the cross. He is taken down. Now remember, this is Friday leading into the Sabbath, Saturday. No work is done on the Sabbath. No work is done on Saturday. They put him in a tomb that is made by a specific man whose only reference in the New Testament is here. Joseph of Arimathea, who in some way is a believer or a disciple of Jesus. He has carved out a tomb, a sepulchre, in the Latin sepulchrum. And he offers it for them to bury Jesus in. Mind you, they have to do this pretty quickly. They said, once sundown starts, the new day starts. The new day is Sabbath. No work. Everyone of Jesus' followers at this point is a loyal and faithful practitioner of the Jewish faith. So they rapidly clean Jesus up. And they bury him. One of the altarpieces, many altarpieces found throughout European churches, is one example of this central image of the cross, of the crucifixion. You see here the titulus, I-N-R-I. Who's last one is actually the order. You see some figures who will be highlighted more when we talk about the crucifixion in John's Gospel. Mary, the mother of Jesus, John, one of his apostles, Mary Magdalene, who is talked about in the other crucifixion accounts. The image here of John the Baptist pointing to Jesus as what he is, what he called Jesus at his baptism, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. Down at the bottom, might be hard to see on screen or whatnot, and it'll be up there, is a kind of thing of the burial of Jesus. He is wrapped in a shroud, in a complete shroud. This was a part of the custom that was done. That one single shroud that would have covered him completely, lengthwise, or height-wise, I should say, front and back. These images up here are purported to be these images are from what is known as the Shroud of Turin, which is said to be the possible burial shroud. One. Images on here of one who has endured much suffering and pain. These are all blood stains. The form of a body here, you can see a head up here, you can see the wrist. They say the wrist in particular because here on the Shroud of Turin, there's a massive wound in the wrist of this person. Not necessarily in the hand, these are kind of hands, and you can see much better images online if you want to see them. But one who has suffered, he has lashes all across his back. Almost every part of at least his upper body is bloody and bruised. The head even covered in blood as well. Yes?
Even his side, his left side there looks particularly bloody. And then if you look at the feet, his right foot on the bottom seems to be crossed over, and on the other side, his left foot seems to be bloody.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
During his crucifixion, I believe it was like after his death, then the Romans test to make sure he was dead by stabbing.
That is usually talked about in John's Gospel specifically, so we'll talk about that detail. Look at the John's Gospel. It's not really related in the synopsis. Another item that is usually talked about is what is known as the Sudarion in Greek. Sudarion, Sudarion, which is usually Latinized as Sudarion, which would be a covering of the face. It would have been a cloth that specifically covers the face. So something that wouldn't, kind of, or maybe at least just the head. It's kind of being respectful towards the head, kind of the head being the head of the body. Even with that, you can see how much, that can also demonstrate to you how much blood has been put onto this shroud. While the actual image of it is most interesting, to look at it as a photographic negative actually reveals far more details, which gives some people some credence to say that. The history of this item is muddied. It's hard to trace versus other sorts of relics. So that's why it's often just said possible. There just doesn't seem to be enough evidence to say, but there's too much about the Shroud of Turin. I probably recommend looking it up for yourself to read up about it. It's a very fascinating item. If it's a fake, it's the most real fake you can ever create. So, the sun sets on that Friday. The Sabbath begins. Jesus' body has been put into the tomb. The stone has been rolled over it. One last detail before we end this specific class. In Matthew's Gospel, it is related that the chief priests go to Pilate before the day ends, and they talk about that Jesus talked about resurrection and rising from the dead. They asked Pilate for some soldiers to guard the tomb. They want these soldiers to guard the tomb because they do not want Jesus' followers to come and steal the body and say, oh, well, he's raised now. He's no longer there. He must be alive. And Pilate gives them these soldiers. And mind you, like I said, these soldiers are professionals. It's literally their life if they don't succeed in their duties. Friday moves into Saturday, the Sabbath. The day of rest is observed. No one goes out, nothing happens. The tomb is guarded. Believers, the followers of Jesus, are all wherever they are resting with their own thoughts. The sun sets on Saturday then, and the first day of the week begins. And there we'll end at least this class. Questions, comments, thoughts on any of that?
Hey, Professor.
So the next, I'm sorry?
Oh, I was just going to say, did you get my message?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I thought I sent a reply back, so all right, so we'll stop there. The next class, we'll look at what happens on that first day of the week.